Hello and welcome. I'm Julie Cashton. For accessibility purposes, I have reddish brown short hair and I'm wearing a bright pink blazer. I'm the Director of Women's Economic Justice and a Senior Fellow at the Century Foundation. The Century Foundation is a progressive think tank that conducts research, develops solutions, and drives policy change to make people's lives better. I'm also the mom of a 9-year-old boy who last night before going to bed asked me first where babies come from, and second, what happens to us when we die. So I am parenting hard right now. Today's event is presented by the Century Foundation alongside the CareWork Network, an international organization of carework researchers and academics and advocates. We'll be discussing the new book, From Crisis to Catastrophe, Care, COVID, and Pathways to Change. And congratulations to the lucky first 50 folks who signed up who will be receiving a free copy of the book. If you did not, you can still order it, and we hope that you will consider that. We're going to use the book today as a vehicle to facilitate our conversation. We're talking about the current state of the care sector. We're reimagining what it could and should look like. And we're exploring the policy strategies for turning our ideas into reality. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. First, the event is being recorded and live streamed. And second, if you have questions, please submit them in the chat using the chat feature. To start us off, I'm so excited. We have Representative Jennifer McClellan. Congresswoman McClellan has been in the U.S. Congress representing Virginia's 4th District since February. She's pretty recent to it. Before that, she was in the Virginia General Assembly, where she passed over 370 pieces of legislation. She worked on voting rights, climate change, reproductive health care, worker rights and protections, and more. She lives in Richmond, Virginia, with her husband and her 2 young kids. Let's hear from her.
Greetings, everyone. Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan here, and I have the privilege of representing Virginia's 4th Congressional District. As a member of the sandwich generation, I understand that care work is the backbone of our society. Yet for too long, the care industry has suffered from a systemic lack of investment. The COVID-19 pandemic laid bare already existing challenges and inequities in various facets of the care economy, including elder care, care for people with disabilities, and childcare. It's clear that our nation faces a childcare crisis. Too many working families find themselves in untenable situations as they contend with limited childcare and early childhood education options and skyrocketing costs. This is the result of a systemic, long-term lack of investment in the childcare industry. For too long, childcare was expected to be free labor, first from slaves, and later, when women entered the workforce and childcare workers were finally paid, they were most often women of color who were exempted from worker protection laws and paid the lowest wage possible. This has perpetuated a vicious set of challenges where childcare workers face low wages and fewer worker protections while working families deal with prohibitive costs. However, congressional Democrats took historic action during the pandemic to invest in the childcare industry through the American Rescue Plan's Child Care Stabilization Funds. These tremendous federal investments provided much needed relief to childcare providers while expanding opportunities for childcare, Head Start, and other early childhood education programs to working families across the nation. Unfortunately, we recently went over a childcare cliff as the ARP stabilization grants expired on September 30th. As noted in the Century Foundation's report, this endangers childcare spots for 3.2 million children and 70,000 childcare programs nationwide. In Congress, I'm part of a small club of working mothers. Less than 7% of members are mothers of children under 18, and only 3% of Congress are such moms of color. I've used my experience as a working mom to fuel the fight to stave off this cliff and invest in the childcare economy through the Child Care Stabilization Act to renew grants. I also recently introduced the Child Care for Maternal Health Act, bipartisan legislation that seeks to increase short-term child care access to mothers during pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum period. It is imperative that Congress continues to work to address the child care crisis and invest in future generations. Thank you to the Century Foundation and the Care Work Network for your continued efforts in the care economy, and I look forward to our continued collaboration.
We need more Jennifer McClellans in Congress. I'm just so grateful that she is there. We need more moms. We need more moms of color. We need more sandwich generation members. What an honor to have her speak. Now, I'm excited to open the opening conversation with Ai-jen Poo in conversation with Dion Davis. So I'm going to just take a little moderator privilege here. I first met Ai-jen about a decade ago, maybe a little bit less. And just to share the bio from my perspective, Ai-jen truly leads with love. She is in this work because her heart knows that a better place is possible, that our world can be a better place. And she is helping to get us there. She is not just a visionary leader, but she is a manifester. Ai-jen has an idea and a vision, and then next thing you know, a lot of hard work goes into it, and it becomes a reality. It's just true. She asks questions that others don't even have the imagination to ask, and she has courageous conversations that change the entire landscape. Her official bio says that she is a next-generation labor leader, award-winning organizer, author, and a leading voice in the women's movement, and we're so thrilled she is with us here. She's going to be in conversation with Dion Davis, who I'm getting to meet for the first time now and can't wait to get to know better. Dion is a super proud nanny who focuses on infant care for first-time parents. This is so important. She's an educator, a motivational speaker, a member of We Dream in Black Georgia chapter, a member of the National Domestic Workers Alliance Nanny Council, an author, and a fierce advocate for domestic workers. Thank you for joining us today. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Julie. That was the nicest introduction I maybe have ever received. And I've been so proud to work alongside you for all of these years. I want to start with actually just saying congratulations to you, to the Century Foundation, and to the Care Work Network on this extraordinary and important book that everyone should read. It should really inform how we think about every step forward into the future. And I also just want to say how important it is to have had you, Julie, advocating in Congress for the care agenda, and especially as an extraordinary leader on childcare and what it means, childcare policy means to the future of this country. It's just been amazing to have you as a partner and a leader in this care movement. And I'm so excited to be in conversation today with Dion. There's no better person to really talk about care work, the state of the care sector, and what a vision for the future should be. We both are part of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, which is the nation's voice for the 2.2 million nannies, house cleaners, and home care workers who work inside of our homes. It's the work that makes all other work possible, right, Dion? That's what we always say. And it is the work that enables millions of working parents and family caregivers to participate in the economy, to do what they do every day. It supports the dignity of older adults, the ability of people with disabilities to live full lives, and the nurturing the human potential of children every day, which is what Dion does. And I'll just say that the National Domestic Workers Alliance is really proud to be a part of a growing movement of organizations, a coalition called Care Can't Wait, which has come together to really push for childcare, affordable, quality childcare for everyone in this country who needs it, for aging and disability care, for paid family and medical leave, and for good living wage jobs for every worker in the care economy. And that is what we're going to talk about today, is the work in the care economy that powers it all. And so Dion, maybe we could start the conversation by just having you share a little bit about the work that you do and how the pandemic impacted your work, you and your family.
Okay, great. The work that I do, that is a loaded question. I get to wake up every morning and do what I love, which is take care of the babies. During the pandemic, the world stopped, but the bills did not stop. I am a single mom, and if I don't work, we don't eat, right? I can't support my kids if I don't work. I'm also an asthmatic and a breast cancer survivor. So I have pre-existing conditions that made COVID more dangerous for me. My oldest son wanted me to stay home, but I couldn't because my employer was a frontline worker. This is one of the unique challenges about care work, caring for others, but sometimes being unable to care for my own family in the way that I need to.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's just so important to underscore that you were supporting a frontline worker, an essential worker. So as an essential worker yourself, you were enabling so much essential work. And I think so many domestic workers were in that position, in addition to the home care workers who were really the only lifeline to some of the people who are at the greatest risk.
Yes.
To COVID itself, like older people, people who are chronically ill, people with disabilities. And so that set of responsibilities that you carried for your own family and to support the family of an essential worker must have been a huge weight. How did you navigate that? And what would have been helpful to you as you were navigating that?
Yeah. Navigation was insane, right? Because I couldn't stop. I had to keep going. I had to keep moving. I had to provide for my family. I took all the necessary precautions that I could take, wearing a mask, washing my hands. But we all know that those things sometimes still didn't work, right? But when I come home to my family, it was still like being alone, you know. Um, Being a nanny is kind of lonely work because we don't have coworkers. We don't have people that we can talk to during the day. We're with the kids all day. And then when I come home to my family, it was almost the same thing. I was still alone at home. My kids were in their room. I was in my room. We were texting to talk. We were using FaceTime to talk. We were having FaceTime dinners, basically. My oldest son, he will watch the news all day. You know, he was home all day. He's watching the news. He knows the seriousness of this, and he couldn't understand why everyone else in the world was staying home, but yet I still had to go to work. It was frightening for all of us.
I can only imagine he must have been so worried about his mama, just like
Yes.
we all were worried about the people that we love. And what is so interesting about this reality is that, you know, prior to the pandemic, we were you were working in an industry where there is very little protection.
Yes.
The wages were very low, and 82% of domestic workers didn't have a single paid sick day going into the pandemic, right? And so the conditions, it's not like things were great before the pandemic happened. And I think it's really important to just underscore that for people. What was it like? What was it like to be in an industry where there's so little safety net? And what does that mean when a crisis hits?
Yeah, it's frightening. It's frightening because you don't know which way to turn. Like I said, I had pre-existing conditions already. And sometimes when I go to work, the kids will have colds, they will have runny noses. And if I got sick, the only thing I could do was stay home without pay or go to work sick. There's no safety net for me. There wasn't one before the pandemic, and there certainly isn't one after it.
And what did that mean for your kids? It's many of us face impossible choices when it comes to navigating the care for our loved ones and working. At the end of the day, you're navigating that multiple times a day. Can you talk about what that's like for your own children?
Yes, it's frightening for them. I can't say that enough, how frightening it is, because we just live in the unknown. We don't know what's going to happen until it happens, no matter how many precautions that we take. And it's like they want to go outside, they want to go with their friends, they don't understand fully why they can't. I wasn't being a mean parent, right? I wasn't punishing them. I was protecting them as best as I knew how. But they just couldn't comprehend that, because they were young. My son, he's a teenager, so he understands much more than they do. But it was a sad situation. It was stressful at work. It was double stress when I come home, and there's no relief. There's nothing. You just go to sleep and you wake up and you do that cycle all over again. Kids crying in the morning because they don't want mommy to leave. My son is like punishing me, the mom, because, he's scolding me because the world says stay home, right? He can't go to school. He can't be with his friends. But yet I'm still getting up and going to work. He doesn't understand that if I don't work, we don't have a place to live. We don't have food to eat. And he just wanted to be safe and didn't want any of us to get sick, which that wasn't the case for me. I did catch COVID, not once, but twice. And that was even a bigger headache, because now I'm not just distancing myself from you guys. I am sick while I'm distancing myself. So we're getting care packages at the door. My little ones thought that was great, like presents, at the door. But they don't understand the dynamics that all went into that. Mom being sick, neighbors helping out, loved ones helping out, my son stepping into that parent role when I couldn't parent the younger ones, and him even taking care of me because at a point I couldn't take care of myself.
Isn't that amazing how these roles change, right? Where we rely on the people we care for to care for us at different times.
Yeah.
And care has to be the cycle. And it is an all hands on deck situation.
Mm-hmm.
Only it could be a lot easier, right? If we had more support, if we had better systems and more funding for childcare, for these kinds of supports that would make our ability to take care of each other so much easier and allow us to focus on the things that really matter. And on that note, I'd love to hear from you. I know you've thought about this a lot. Like, what are your dreams for this workforce? What, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you like to see for care workers like domestic workers?
Well, one thing I want everyone to know is care work is skilled work, right?
Mm-hmm.
You go to school and you get experience to enhance the skill that we already have within us, which is compassion, right? I know my value for work, but it wasn't always that way. And NDWA, the National Domestic Workers Alliance, has trained me, has helped me to understand my worth and the work that I do. Today, every time I introduce myself, I love to say that I am a super proud nanny, because there was once a point that I wasn't so proud to say that. I want my value to be reflected in my pay and my benefits. We all have a job that we love to do, and we want that job to be sufficient to live a life that's worth living. Everyone wants that. Probably a lot of you attending right now is able to be here because someone else is taking care of your children. Or maybe they're taking care of your elderly loved one that can't take care of themselves. Or just maybe you're able to go home to a clean home and you can focus right now at work because that stress is being relieved by a domestic worker. I took time out of my day from work to be here to talk to everyone today, and I have to go back to it very shortly. The work that care workers like me do is critical. It's critical because if we don't show up, you can't show up. Domestic workers are essential workers, and our salaries and our benefits must reflect that.
You said it all, I think. You heard it here from Miss Dion. This is skilled work. This is work that allows us all to show up, and it should be respected, protected, and compensated as such. And at NDWA, we like to call these jobs triple dignity investments, because when we make care jobs good jobs with family sustaining wages and benefits and real economic security, it not only helps Dion and her family and all of our members and their families, but it helps all of us who rely on the work that they do every day to be able to go and do what we do in the world. And it helps the children who are in their care. The incredible nurturing and energy that Dion puts into every child in her care is what our kids deserve. It helps them in every stage of their life going forward. For the older adults and people with disabilities who are supported by home care workers, it is enabling of their dignity. What could be more important? So talk about a win-win-win investment. What's so great about it is that we have more momentum than ever. Dion and our sisters all over the country are organizing. We are so proud to be a part of a movement that is growing in power and momentum. And we have champions like Representative McClellan in Congress and so many more. And we just invite all of you to join us, to read this book, have it as one of your Bibles as we build this movement going forward. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you, Dion, and thank you, Julie. Back to you.
Thank you both so much. I am so inspired. Triple dignity. That is what we're talking about here when we talk about care. Well, what a great way to start the conversation. And now we will move into a conversation about the book. I feel very privileged to have had a chance to write a chapter for the book, From Crisis to Catastrophe. And now I'm thrilled to be in conversation with two of the other authors, Mignon Duffy and Juliana Martinez Franzoni. Mignon is a professor of sociology at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. Her research focuses on how the social organization of care intersects with gender, race, class, and global and other inequalities. She is the co-editor of this book that we are talking about, and she is a longtime member of the leadership team of the Care Work Network. Juliana is a professor of political science at the University of Costa Rica, which she was kind enough to show me around in when I got to visit. She's a steering committee of the Care Work Network, Her most recent work investigates whether responses to the pandemic have entailed opportunities for social policy change in Central America and public opinion towards cash transfers across Latin America. She is the recipient of multiple prestigious fellowships, and we are so excited to be here with you both. Let's start with Mignon. What inspired you, along with Amy Armenia and Kim Price-Glynn, to bring together us and other authors to create this book? What did you dream of achieving with the book?
Yeah, well, interestingly, the conversation that we just heard between Dion and Ijen really answers this question because at the CareWork Network, we have a big listserv, a big email listserv that has about 700 people from all over the world who are scholars and activists in the care world. And during the pandemic, this listserv became really active. And a lot of what was being shared was stories like Dion's about the kind of impossible situation that care workers were being put into, where they were either losing their jobs and not able to support their families, or being forced to put themselves at health risk to continue their work. And stories like she was telling of being separated from their families, these kinds of things were happening all over the globe in different contexts, in addition to kind of the increased burden on women to do the unpaid care when childcare centers closed, when schools closed, and people were sort of having to absorb that work in their homes. So on our listserv, we were hearing all these stories of the impact of COVID on care workers, both paid and unpaid. At the same time on the listserv, we were also hearing stories of what Ijen referred to as kind of the momentum in the care movement that gained a level of visibility and prominence during the pandemic that we had never seen. So we were starting to see people from different countries sharing stories of, oh, in Argentina, they're doing this, in Costa Rica, they're doing this, in France, they're doing this, and, you know, and kind of saw this explosion of policy innovations that and public discourse around care that was kind of unprecedented. So it was really that conversation happening on the listserv that inspired us to want to do a couple things with this book. We wanted to, one, just document this moment in history and kind of document the impact and the intersections of care and the COVID pandemic. We also wanted to show, and both Ijen and Dion referred to this, that these issues in care that were being brought to the forefront are not new, that they are long-standing issues that were raised up by the pandemic, but not created by the pandemic. And finally, we really wanted to elevate the voices of scholars and advocates who've been building expertise in understanding care for decades. In this moment when suddenly everyone was talking about care, we wanted to be sure that people who had a deep understanding of care, that their voices were part of this dialogue.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you did. It is really such a great book. So let's dig into the meat of it. Juliana, you and your co-author, Vina Sidar, examine how the COVID-19 pandemic intensified the racial, gender, and ethnic inequalities already existing in Latin America's care regime. And you talk specifically about the need for social policies to assist with unpaid care responsibilities and women's labor force participation. You talk about sticky floors, broken ladders, and glass ceilings. Can you talk more about what these concepts are, how the pandemic played out for women in those categories? And, you know, you wrote about the Latin America context, but I think they're relevant in the United States too. So if you could kind of bring that out too, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for this question, Julie. Before I respond, for accessibility purposes, let me say that I have dark hair and a beige shirt. And the beautiful sunflower in my background is a symbol for the University of Costa Rica. Just as the sunflowers seek the light of the sun, our university, a public university, is an impermanent search for knowledge. or so we hope. Back to your question. Overall, in Latin America, there is an absence of universal care services generally, and you know, these coexist with low-paid and unprotected domestic work. This said, today, Latin American women are as unequal among ourselves as ever. And sticky floors, broken ladders, and glass ceilings are a typology of women's experience in the labor force that Fernando Filgueira, Silke Staff, and I developed for UN Women in 2017 in their regional report on Latin America, hoping not only to depict the situation, but also to call for better policy that acknowledge common grounds, but also variations among women. So under sticky floors, women face the most significant instability and poverty. They have primary education at best and reside in low-income households. Their labor force participation rates are lower than men with equal education. And when they do enter the labor force, they are often trapped in insecure and unprotected work, such as poorly unregulated paid domestic service. Women in this group cope with a heavy burden of unpaid care work, exacerbated by persistently high rates of early motherhood, which they frequently face alone. At the other end are women with university education and high household incomes, and their labor force participation is as high as the men with similar levels of education. However, they still face glass ceilings that limit them. For example, these women, like myself, face the largest gender pay gap of the three groups of women that we depict. And the burden of unpaid work for this group is lower than for other women because they can pay other women, right? They can pay other women to be able to delegate their care work, and this way, Latin American women, for the most part, avoid renegotiating with men their labor responsibility, their care work responsibility. And between these two scenarios are the women who struggle with what we call broken ladders. These women participate in the labor force more than their sticky floors sisters, even when they have very young children, but without policy protections to work steadily while dealing with care responsibilities. They are highly sensitive to shocks, not only pandemics and economic crisis, but divorce or changes in labor conditions. So these women are always in the brink of stepping down the ladder, always. And therefore they endure highly volatile work lives that really, get in the way of their income security and empowerment, and also their mental health.
Thank you. These concepts are so resonant, I think, in many places, maybe all of the places. And it leads us very nicely into, Mignon, your chapter that you co-authored, where you talk about structural racism, sexism, and care work in the United States. Can you talk a little bit about how your findings indicate what we saw playing out during the pandemic and the impact on Black women in particular? I think Dion really helped to paint that picture, and would love to hear what you found in your chapter.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. It really builds on what Dion was talking about and what Juliana was just referring to in terms of different structures of inequalities. I just want to mention my co-authors on this chapter were Jeanette Dill, J. Mudkarba, and Odi Akusinu. And our chapter kind of took as its starting point the much publicized racial disparities in COVID mortality rates in the United States. So CDC statistics from the first year of the pandemic showed that Black women were almost 5 times as likely to be hospitalized for COVID and twice as likely to die as white Americans. And in our chapter, what we're really doing is interrogating those numbers by looking at the link between Black women's predominance in paid care and those health outcomes. We heard in Dion's story a little bit of her sort of being forced to put herself in a precarious position health-wise and put her health at risk. And so we're kind of looking at that link in particular through the healthcare workforce, through the low-wage healthcare workforce. So this chapter, I would say, has two key sets of findings. The first is that Black women are heavily concentrated in the healthcare workforce. At the beginning of the pandemic, almost 1/4 of Black women who are in the labor force were working in healthcare. So 1 in 4. The majority of Black women in the healthcare workforce work in the low-wage end of the healthcare workforce. So long-term care, nursing aides, home health aides. And these are workers that are in very precarious, unprotected, low-wage jobs before the pandemic. And then when the pandemic hits, are on the front lines of putting their bodies at risk by continuing their work. As you heard from Dion, similar to childcare workers, these are also workers who don't have paid sick days. They don't have access to childcare or healthcare. Of course, all of those things impact the impact that COVID and other health situations would have on these workers. So that's really the first thing that this chapter highlights, is that Black women's role in the labor force is directly linked to the outcomes that we saw during COVID. The second key piece of the findings in this chapter harken back to something that you referred to and also Ijen referred to, which is that this position of Black women in the labor market, particularly what we focus on in the healthcare workforce and in care work generally, has a long history and is rooted in structural racism and sexism. So all the way back to slavery, when enslaved women were forced to do the most backbreaking and difficult work in households. Through the 20th century, we saw a lot of Black women in the United States confined to a very narrow set of occupations, including domestic work, again, doing a lot of kind of the very dirty, dangerous work of households, often at cost to their own families. As the modern healthcare system developed in the 20th century, this same stratification translated into the healthcare workforce, with Black women predominating in the hard, risky, difficult, dirty work of care, in part due to their exclusion from medical schools and nursing schools through the beginning of the 20th century. So that's the second piece of the chapter that's important, is that this stratification of the healthcare workforce has a long history and is deeply rooted in both structural racism and cultural ideas about care.
I guess like both chapters we've discussed so far address what's common grounds for women and care workers on the one hand, but also the deep inequalities in which care work takes place. And Julie, if I may ask, in your chapter, you write that intersecting oppressions these intersecting oppressions have led to 3 challenges: an every family and caregiver for themselves approach, an undervaluing of care work and silos between care consumers and care workers, and across care solutions at different life stages. Mignon has already laid out some of these intersecting oppressions, but could you elaborate more about these ideas and how we saw them play out at the height of the pandemic?
Thank you. That is a great question. Yeah, so I think, there's something about the intentionality of trying to maintain the status quo. So, what I write about is how culture and policy have both been used intentionally to support these ideas of an every family and every caregiver for themselves approach, to stoke divisions between those who provide the care and those who receive it, and to create silos across care solutions at different ages and stages. And so, an example is that we see these messages that care is an individual responsibility and should never be a collective one. And we see that repeated by, supposed experts, by policy leaders, by pop culture stories, magazines, and more. And it's been decades where it's both been said explicitly and implicitly. And you'll see, I try never to read the comments, but if you read on the comments on articles, you'll often see folks saying, if you can't afford kids, why are you having them, right? So it's folks who are really bought into this concept that you're on your own. This is a DIY kind of a situation, right? And there are ways in which the pandemic really reinforced these norms. You know, the virus spread really easily. People were afraid. As Dion talked about, you know, her family wanted her to stay home. And that was the message everyone had. Be on your own. Just do your own thing. Take care of yourselves, right? And that was what was safest, right? We knew that people who were in congregate care, in nursing homes, that was where COVID spread the most, and more people died in nursing homes than anywhere else. And so these kind of collective ideas of care were really challenged by the realities that we were facing. You know, and at the same time, you know, we saw people who wanted to rely on grandparents or other loved ones just could not do it because they didn't want to put their grandparents at risk. That was for some people. Other people did not have a choice, right? And, you know, Dion talked about she needed to go to work so she could both support the essential workers that she was working for and that she could keep a roof over her head. And that was also the story for so many people. And so I think, you know, that really plays out in this, are we for ourselves or are we for everyone? And I think what I loved about Dion's story also is how she talked about how the neighbors showed up with care packages, right? Because we know that even though we've been socialized with these messages that you're on your own, there's also this underlying sense of community that people, and often women, often communities of color, really show up for each other in those ways. I think the other pieces of this are, you know, when you have somebody who's receiving care, separately thinking about them as opposed to the person providing the care, so that you're paying somebody poorly, you're not really investing in them as a person. That means that you're not investing in the best quality care, right? You want the person caring for your baby, caring for your aging parent to have what they need to be economically secure, to be stable, to have, you know, health and well-being, right? That's important for both the person receiving the care and the person giving the care. And too often our public policies split them. You know, we invest in childcare programs as services and don't put enough money in to pay higher wages or to pay benefits. We invest in home care, but we don't pay enough money to the home care workers and direct care workers. So this has really become a division. And similarly, you know, childcare is separate from elder care, separate from giving supports and services to people with disabilities. And really, it's all part of the same ecosystem. So I think, you know, these are ways in which we both saw them play out more during the pandemic, but also started to see through those divisions, right? And the people who are intentionally maintaining these false divisions, or maybe unintentionally, but just maintaining it as status quo, you know, they're really keeping things apart so that it's harder to build political power. But really, when we bring it all together, when we bring the people providing the care with the people who are receiving the care, with the child care stories and the home care stories for older Americans, we are really able to see things in a much more abundant setting. And so I think, you know, the pandemic really shone some very interesting lights on that.
Thank you.
That's a great segue, Julie, because as you mentioned, one of the things we were that we saw during the pandemic, and also that we were trying to do with the book, was really document what you've been hearing, which is how incredibly deeply entrenched the problems and inequalities in the care sector are. But we also saw some glimmers of hope and some new momentum in different directions. And I guess that's what we'd like to turn to next. So Juliana, if you could give us some insight about kind of where things are in Latin America for care and what is giving you hope. What are the bright spots?
Well, I would say there are at least three bright spots. One, the first one has to do with an agreement, I would say, on the need for care policy to be the fourth pillar of welfare regimes, together with education, healthcare, and social security. Nobody challenges that countries have to have education, healthcare, and social security. And increasingly, there is an understanding that care policy is that fourth pillar, which would include transfers and services, but also social and labor protection for paid care workers. Secondly, care policies have spread at the national level across several countries in Latin America, but also reached subnational and local governments, which are incipiently moving forward in addressing care, I would say, beyond social policy to reach, for example, urban planning, which is so important, you know, to have caring societies, you know, sidewalks, accessibility, and so on. And thirdly, there is a challenging, a complex, but in the making cross-class coalition, I would say, that can bring together women living under sticking floors, along those who are under broken ladders and glass ceilings. I mean, in a context in which there is such a strong class inequality as it is the case in Latin America, this is crucial to bring these women together. And great examples of what I'm saying are examined in a recent piece by Flavia Marco. There she reports care work networks in 6 diverse Latin American countries, from El Salvador to Cuba, Bolivia, Uruguay, and Mexico. These alliances provide an opportunity to bring some of the changes that Ai-jen Po and Dion were talking about, some of the changes that we badly need that have to do with services, with transfers, with labor regulations, and that link social policies with labor and productive strategies, particularly for creating better jobs, right? And so, of course, this implies placing care work as part and parcels of a better income distribution. It's not just some little policy that we women think among themselves. No, it cuts across all meaningful policies that deal with income distribution. And much of what's happening reflects active issue networks that cut across social movements and state policy, and which for some time now have pursued the reorganization of care work. Now, not so bright, to wrap things up, the mantle of austerity and the enormous difficulty in giving robust and progressive fiscal content to the much needed transformations. We cannot talk about a reorganization of care work without addressing a fiscal pact, fiscal agreements, and you know, more resources. And secondly, the rise of authoritarian regimes, particularly, but not only in Central America, which of course pose a challenge because this conversation we are having today requires democratic environments, competitive elections, programmatic parties, a voice for social movements. So these are 2 cautionary notes that call for placing our agenda in a broader context at the moment.
Great. Thank you, Juliana, both for those glimmers of hope and also the cautionary notes, which we would do well to heed and apply somewhat in the United States as well. So turning to the United States, Julie, your chapter in the book really is kind of a roadmap for the future and policy solutions for care in the United States. Can you please share in the US context what you see some of the most important policy solutions as being and what the current status of those is?
Yes. And, you know, I feel like a lot of it builds on what Juliana just said. You know, we have to start with the foundation of investment, and that's into a robust care infrastructure. That has to include childcare for all, paid leave for all, a holistic vision for long-term supports and services with a real focus on home and community-based services that has to look at quality care and quality jobs as completely intersecting and intermingling. And, you know, what we do have is a president in the United States who has articulated this type of a vision and pushed for it. We had a bill that did pass the House of Representatives, but not go all the way to the Senate. We have a CARE executive order, the first of its kind, where this administration looked across every agency and said, figure out how to prioritize care within your agency. And we're already starting to see some of those policies moving forward. We also have industrial policy where, you know, they put in policies to say, if you're building new jobs, they should come with childcare. And that came especially as part of the CHIPS program with semiconductor manufacturers, which is not something you often hear in the same sentence, semiconductor manufacturing and childcare, right? So this is something new. We have champions in Congress fighting for it. We have coalitions and movements like Care Can't Wait, like Aijen mentioned, that are becoming more powerful every day. And we have the lessons from the policies of the pandemic. So the American Rescue Plan included unprecedented investments in childcare and home and community-based services. We also saw emergency paid family leave and paid sick days for the first time ever as part of the early packages addressing the pandemic. And so we know what it's like when we have those policies in place because we've seen them. So there's a lot to learn from them. And I've actually written with the CARE Fund about the 6 top lessons to learn from the pandemic era CARE investments. So highly recommend checking that out. But it also means that we are currently, you know, those are my hopes, right? My hopeful moments, but it means that we're currently seeing a big challenge because we didn't pass those policies permanently. That means that we have a childcare cliff right now. And the Century Foundation, as Representative McClellan mentioned, we projected that 3.2 million children could lose their childcare because this money has gone away, because this funding that we put into the childcare sector has expired already. And so we have some hope. The White House has said they are going to put out a new letter of request with childcare funding to address this exact problem. So, you know, for every moment of hope, we have some kind of setback and then hope again. And that's kind of where we are right now. And I feel both hopeful and scared. But I do think that we can continue to see progress. And with that, we will turn to the audience Q&A. So thank you both for that discussion, and please stay on with me to see if either of you want to answer some of these questions. And I think we did get to this a little bit, but I'd love to hear what you think about how the pandemic changed what's possible in terms of care policy. And then, Jan, maybe you could start.
Sure. I mean, in the US context, I think the biggest thing that has changed is that all those things you just mentioned are on the agenda. So we haven't successfully made them permanent parts of the policy landscape, but I would say pre-pandemic, those things were getting discussed in corners of the policy world and corners of the academic world, but not writ large in you know, kind of public policy discourse. So for me, the biggest change is more of a awareness and visibility change. And the hope is that that will translate into some more permanent policy change. But certainly the change in the discourse and visibility has been palpable in the United States.
Juliana, do you want to add to that?
Yes, well, I think seen from a Latin American perspective, changes in the US were wonderful and created an opening because of the impact that US policy has in Latin America, whether good or bad, right? But meanwhile, in Latin America, I think very little was done that could stay beyond the pandemic. In fact, you know, the Latin America did great as far as responding very quickly with social protection measures, particularly with cash transfers, unconditional cash transfers. It showed that most governments, even the weakest ones, can do way better than they do under so-called normal times. And it showed that it wasn't that they couldn't, but that they didn't have enough of an incentive to actually reach people. Let's take Guatemala. The government there reached 10 million people in 2 months, 2.2 million households. But overall, all of these measures were gender blind and did not pay attention to care work. And care work remained invisible and ended up reinforcing the re-traditionalization of women's role, like basically strengthening the assumption that there were women back home to pick up the pieces of whatever was not being done at schools, healthcare services, and elsewhere. And in that sense, I think the pandemic means a backlash, right, for us. The bright side is the politicization of care work issues. I mean, and the fact that we see so much collective action challenging this idea and challenging that this is a good thing, not only for women and families, but also for the economies. This is a region in which overall women have higher levels of education than men, and yet, you know, this is not reflecting in productivity and in other indicators of economic performance because women are basically back home in larger numbers than before. So I think we have much to learn from what we did, but also from what we did not do during the pandemic.
Thank you. And I think that, you know, that also just makes me think about how if one of our goals is to fight against this, it's every family for themselves, right? And that this is an individual problem. Getting to see how it impacted each of us, right? You know, those who were able to work from home and work on Zoom saw children in the background on a pretty regular basis, right? And so people actually tangibly saw, I am a caregiver, you are a caregiver, we are all in this together. And so I think to your point about kind of movements building and people seeing each other in this, right? And when you see it as something that is a public and a common problem, that's how you start to see that there are also common solutions. So I think that that was a really important piece to that. I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions. I am seeing this one is, how can we better understand the dichotomy of paid versus unpaid care work? When is this framing helpful or harmful? And Juliana, I feel like you were getting at that a little bit with this gender blind and the backlash, if you want to start us out.
Well, I mean, I think about this matter as a constellation. I mean, like, you know, we deal with care work with a combination of paid and unpaid work all the time, and so there are so many also in betweens, and that's problematic. You know, much of the paid work that's been done in Latin America, it's improperly paid, and that's why it's so important. You know, because it becomes precarious, unprotected, and this is why I think one of the key pieces to change the situation in Latin America is how much advocacy organized domestic workers have been doing to say, look, I mean, this is valuable job, this is trained, skilled work, as Dion was saying, and this means that we need to change the rules of the game. And with this, we change the rules of the game of the entire care regime, because then we create incentives for better labor regulations, but also for better services for all. Meaning we give up assuming that the best way of dealing with care work is with paid domestic work. Like, paid domestic work has a place, but we also need universal care services for all, including for the children of paid domestic workers, right? So this is one of the, I think one of the win-win type of alliances that can lead the region to better services, to better labor regulations that touch simultaneously on both paid and unpaid care work.
Thank you so much. And I'm noticing we've got 1 minute left, so I am going to go ahead and close us out. But I think that was exactly right and really appreciate that answer. Thank you both so much for being here. Thank you to Representative McClellan, to our interpreters, to Ijin, to Dion, and for everyone who has participated and attended. Book winners will receive an email, if you haven't already, from Leah Woods, woods@tcf.org. You should be receiving your book at the beginning of November. Book is still available to order. A special thank you to CareWork Network for being a wonderful partner in this event. And we will have a recording made available immediately on the tcf.org website. So thank you again to everyone. I hope this gave folks a lot to think about, and the work continues. Thank you.